Why are people so fascinated with the paranormal?
I remember waking up very early one morning, kind of just dawn light in the room, and seeing her standing at the foot of the bed, and kind of did a double take.
So, Chris, thanks very much for coming in.
My
really
pleasure.
appreciate you coming in and going through this. I just want to ask you, the first thing I wanted to ask you, why are people so fascinated with the paranormal?
Oh, that's a $64,000 question. And there's lots of different reasons. I mean, one is that people just find it inherently fascinating. For a lot of people, a world with paranormal phenomena in it is much more exciting than one without. And even kind of the fact that the paranormal is such a feature of fiction and drama and so on, because it is inherently very entertaining stuff. We're fascinated by mysteries. Yeah. And, one of the most prominent characteristics of human beings is curiosity. And so when there are claims that things are happening that don't have an obvious explanation, people want to kind of dig deeper and get into it and so on. So that's one aspect of it. Also, people do have genuinely weird experiences that they can't make sense of.
Have you had any yourself?
I've had experiences that if I were a believer, I might have interpreted as being paranormal experiences, but I'm not, and I think there are more plausible non-paranormal explanations. I mean, just to give you one example, I remember on one occasion when I was living in North Wales, in Bangor, my partner at the time, my girlfriend at the time, was a medical student in Leicester. I remember waking up very early one morning, kind of just dawn light in the room, and seeing her standing at the foot of the bed, and kind of did a double take, and she'd gone. Now, it may or may not be relevant that I had actually been having a few drinks the night before. Who knows? But even so, and by this time I think I would have classed myself as kind of being a skeptic. Even so, I still kind of rang her that evening and said, were you okay last night? Or, were you ill or anything?
Yeah.
She'd been fine, But
so was there any time when you was a believer?
Oh yeah, I used to be a believer well into early adulthood. Okay. All the way through doing an undergraduate degree at Manchester, I was a believer. And when I was doing my PhD, like a lot of postgraduate students, I kind of needed a bit of extra cash. So I used to teach adult education classes at the local college. And I must have had a lot more time on my hands in those days, because I'd go in, and on the first night, I'd give them a general introductory lecture to psychology. And then I'd say, so are there any topics you'd like me to cover? And then, they'd shout things out. I'd go away and prepare tailored lectures for them. And sometimes I'd do stuff on the paranormal. And it was from a totally uncritical pro-paranormal perspective,
Right.
Yeah. And I kind of look back at that and think they were probably sitting there thinking, well, he's doing a PhD. He must know what he's talking about. And no, I really didn't. Really looking back.
It's such a huge area. How did you start breaking it down? How did you start going from, say, the paranormal ghost to UFOs?
I was into all that as a kid. I mean, in different ways. As a kid, I was terrified of ghosts. My elder sister used to tell me scary stories during the day, which during the day seemed like a good idea. It was only when I was on my own in the dark at night that I thought maybe it wasn't such a good idea.
That is quite interesting in why it happens more in the dark.
Oh, of course, yeah. Well, I think you can make a good argument from kind of evolutionary psychology, that in the dark, we're naturally going to be a bit more anxious. If there's a basic anxiety already there, you can't see things, obviously, to state the obvious, things in the corner. I mean, in terms of our evolutionary history, we were kind of very vulnerable at night, and so it would make sense to kind of be a bit more alert. And you're more like, we've got an inbuilt bias towards thinking that if there's a noise in the night, it might be a potential threat. Now, in terms of our evolutionary history, that's served us very well. Yeah. But of course, we've still got that tendency, it's still wired into our brains. And it's not too far from that to thinking, well, if it might be a ghost. If it's not a physical thing, it might be some other kind of thing, you know.
It's interesting. Later on, I'd like to do a lot of things with you more in depth, but just here, tell us about things like tarot cards, mediums. Where do you feel they're getting this energy from, where they feel that they've got this connection?
Well, I mean, I obviously, as you know, I'm a card carrying skeptic these days, but I think that the vast majority of the people who do tarot cards or astrology or any other form of divination, the vast majority genuinely believe in what they're doing. You know, they're not con artists. Now, I'll just will say there are some people out there who are deliberate con artists, and you need to be aware of that, and you need to be, always have that in the back of your mind. But the vast majority are not. They believe in the system that they're using, and the whole psychology of it is really, really interesting. There is a technique known as cold reading, which is used by deliberate con artists to convince complete strangers that you know all about them. And you can buy books on this because mentalists, conjurers, and so on. They'll use these kind of tricks sometimes as well. And that technique, it's a whole set of techniques really. One important part of it is something called the Barnum effect, and that refers to the fact that there are certain kinds of statements that sound as if they're saying something very perceptive about your innermost personality, but actually apply pretty much to everybody. So if I were to do a reading for you based entirely on Barnum-type statements, I might say things like, "I'm getting that you've got a lot of unused potential. You've achieved quite a lot in life, but there's so much more you could achieve if you could just tap into that potential." I mean, everything's, yes, that's me. And I'm getting that there have been times in the past when you've regretted revealing too much of yourself to others. And we all think of those embarrassing times when we've told somebody something and then afterwards wished we hadn't. And I'm getting that you've got a better than average sense of humour. And of course your sense of humour is better than average, because if other people don't laugh at what you find funny, well, they're the ones with the weird sense of humour, aren't they?
Absolutely,
So you can go on like that for quite a long time, but there's a lot more to cold reading than that. People can come away convinced that they've been told very specific information that the cold reader could not possibly know unless they had paranormal abilities. Yeah. Whereas in actual fact, it is based on these techniques. Now, I'm not saying, and I genuinely don't believe, that the majority of psychics and mediums are deliberate con artists. I think, as I said before, that the vast majority genuinely believe it, that they've got this gift. Whenever we try and put it to the test, they don't seem to be able to demonstrate that gift, but I think they genuinely do believe that.
Because when they call on, people who's passed, and then they tell them information, and they are convinced. I spoke to some of these people, and they basically say, he told me things you would never know.
Could not know any other way. Yeah, that's the classic line. Yeah. I mean, and again, I've analysed a lot of sittings between psychics and their clients, and it's interesting that when you look at, you break it down, you go through line by line. One of the interesting things is the number of questions that psychics and mediums ask. Because bear in mind, they're supposed to be telling you stuff, but they do it in an interesting way. It's not a kind of very obvious way. So on one occasion, I write about this in the book, I actually passed myself off as a psychic on daytime TV. I think it was Richard and Judy back in the day. Right. Yeah. And they got a couple of volunteers in for me to do readings with, and I was introduced as being somebody who claimed to have psychic ability. And like in one of the readings, I said as part of the reading, basically I was claiming to be in touch with the spirit of her dearly departed granddad, and I said, and was he a tidy man? And she said, yeah. I said, yeah, I thought he was. Everything had its place, didn't it? Now, if she'd have said no, I'd have said, no, I didn't think he was. He used to leave stuff all over the place, didn't he? Yeah. It sounds like I'm asking for confirmation of something I already know, but in actual fact, the conversation's going to either go that way or that way, depending on what the answer is. And there's a lot of other kind of angles to that, a lot of aspects to that. You can throw out things that are likely to be a hit of some sort. I mean, like if I was doing a reading for you now, I might say something about, I've got an image of a black dog. What's that? Now, if you own a black dog, wow, how could I possibly know that? Yeah. But if you don't, maybe your next door neighbour does, or
Somewhere
maybe
within your...
somewhere, yeah.
Yeah,
And if you keep,
yeah.
and again, I mean, another thing you can do is I've even seen this done. Kind of, I'm getting something about an accident during teenage years. Now, there's a good chance I might get a hit there, but if I don't, I'll widen it.
Right.
So, yeah, it wasn't a serious accident. People thought it was serious at the time, but if that doesn't work, it wasn't you that was hurt. It was,
you can move it
and
along.
Then, and eventually, you might end. If they still kind of just say, no, I'm not getting anything. So, well, go and ask your mum about that, because I'm definitely getting that. That definitely happened. So I'm not wrong. You just haven't thought of it yet. And sometimes people will go away and they'll think about something. They'll think, oh, it was such and such a thing. That's so amazing, because how could you possibly have picked that up?
Do you think it could be also quite dangerous, giving people information that...
Well, it can be. I mean, and you do hear horror stories, but they're quite rare, because most of the time, somebody who's doing the reading wants the client to come back for further readings. So they're not going. But you still do get these situations. I mean, and the mediums and psychics themselves would frown on this. You hear horrible stories of, say, pregnant women being told they're going to lose their baby. Or people being given the date of their death. I mean, and all sorts of. But it's very rare. It's far more likely. I mean, a very, very common theme that runs through these readings is, why are people going for the readings in the first place? I mean, they're either curiosity seekers, they're just going to see what it's all about, or maybe even for a bit of a laugh, not taking it very seriously, or they've got some kind of an issue that they want some advice on. And if it's advice, it's likely to be one of a limited number of areas. It might be health, it might be relationships, it might be jobs. There's not that many things.
Yeah, when we spoke to a young lady before, and she was telling people, and it's mostly relationships.
Yeah,
and I did mention to her about also that can be quite dangerous as well, because if you're telling someone what they should be doing within their relationship, you might be saying, we shouldn't be in that relationship.
Well, you might. I mean, the thing is, somebody might be in a relationship, and again, if they've gone to see a psychic or a medium, they're probably not 100% happy with the relationship, and maybe they just want somebody to say something that gives them the confidence to end the relationship. And very often, as I say, the theme is, I can see things have been really difficult for the last few months, and it's not going to be easy for the next few months, but I can see, like, in 6 months' time, you're going to be much, much happier. You'll have met somebody who's going to be perfect for you. And so people often come away, feeling uplifted, kind of confident. Another thing I did for a TV program years and years back, they got various people to go for readings with different types of diviners. Some were psychics, some were astrologers, some were tarot card readers, etc. And almost, I think without exception, in fact, when they came out from the reader, they all had their hidden cameras on and this kind of stuff. And when they came out and they were interviewed, they were all saying, it's fantastic, and they were all very upbeat. And then, but what they did was also follow up about 6 months to a year later, had all these predictions come true. And of course they hadn't, So you get that kind of temporary boost. And that can sometimes be psychologically helpful for people if you're going through a rough patch,
Of all the areas that you've looked in that, like tarot, medium reason, what one do you think are the most interesting, like astrology? Because some of them quite historical. They've got
a very, very long history. I mean, the form of astrology that we use now is essentially the same as the form of astrology that Ptolemy was using 2,000 years ago, and even prior to that. The Babylonians, were
there's a lot of work goes into it, doesn't it?
Well, there is. I mean, these days, of course. I mean, once upon a time, to have a genuine full horoscope cast would be several hours of kind of painstaking, quite mathematical work. These days, of course, you just put the information to a computer and it'll shoot out the reading at the other side. But it's still, it doesn't really make any difference how you do it. It doesn't, Sometimes astrologers object to skeptics and they say, of course, we don't think anybody should take sun sign astrology seriously. It's ridiculous that a 1/12 of the population would all have the same kind of, future predictions. But it's a full horoscope that you have to do. That's the real thing. Now, in fact, it doesn't matter which type of astrology you look at. It's got zero validity. It has been looked at in huge depth. And it just doesn't work. The astrologers believe that they can do. I mean, again, another thing with all these diviners is that it's only people who are impressed by the reading who are likely to give them any feedback.
Yeah.
If you went to see a tarot card reader and you came away thinking, well, that was a load of rubbish, you know, you're probably going to be too polite to tell them that. So the only feedback they ever get is saying how great you are. That was a fantastic reading.
What do you think of star signs and people's character based on their star signs?
Well, again, there's nothing in it. I mean, this has been. I mean, one very good way of testing this empirically is to look at what the star sign astrology says about compatibility. Now, that ought to show up in the divorce statistics. And there have been kind of studies done where you've had sample sizes of several thousand, and it doesn't make any difference. There's no higher divorce rates.
Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it's been looked at. All of this stuff's been looked at. There have been thousands and thousands of tests of astrology, often carried out by people who thought they would find positive results. I mean, I know two people in particular spring to mind, both kind of friends of mine. One I'm still in touch with, a guy called Jeffrey Dean, who is a Brit living in Australia, and he is probably the world's most expert person on empirical tests of astrology. But he started off as an astrologer. He believed in it all, but he also understood science. Yeah. And he thought, well, I'm going to use science to prove that astrology works. And after a while realised that no, it doesn't. So now he's one of the biggest skeptics and critics of astrology. The other one was a guy called Mike Startup, who was he was at Goldsmiths before I started there, but he did his PhD, again, firm believer in astrology, and was looking at one particular aspect in the hope that it would produce positive evidence. And he didn't. I mean, he unlike Jeffrey Dean, he dropped it and he became a clinical psychologist. And but
so sometimes it's get a bit disappointing if they don't achieve, if they get nothing from it.
Well, I would have thought that. I'm surprised that Jeffrey Dean is still fascinated by astrology, considering he's absolutely convinced that there's nothing in it. But he's interested then in the psychology of, well, why do people think it works? Yeah. And again, every so often you will get some study that comes out that seems to produce some support for astrology. It'll get a huge amount of media coverage, and we need people like Jeffrey to be able to have a good look at the study and say, well, hang on, they didn't control for this, and they didn't do the right analysis, and so on and so forth.
When you're moving on, so just moving on slightly now to say the UFOs. Now, people say they've been abducted.
They do indeed.
So what's going on there?
Right. Well, we should definitely do a
whole one on
session
that.
On this, because it's fascinating. I think that in a lot of cases, first thing to say is there isn't a single explanation for all the different claims in this kind of an area. But certainly a lot of those claims, I would say, are based on false memories. Okay. Now, how do the false memories arise in the first place? Well, what you find with a lot of the cases, again, not all, I'm aware of that, what you find in a lot of the cases is that initially people often have a suspicion that maybe they've been abducted by aliens, even though they can't actually remember it, because within the ufological community, it's widely accepted that when the aliens abduct you, they are able to wipe your memory for the experience. So what would make you come to suspect that you might have been abducted by aliens? Well, there's a whole host of possibilities. One is if you have repeated experiences of seeing a UFO, seeing something up in the sky, you don't know what it is. And then, you maybe start reading around in the ufology books and hear about the fact that the aliens can wipe your memory when they abduct you. Or people waking up in the morning and finding inexplicable, as they would see it, marks on their body, scars.
You often hear that,
Yeah, that's another one. Yeah. Missing time experiences where people suddenly realise they can't account for what they were doing between.
You hear that a lot.
That's another common one. But one of the most common ones, and one of the ones that I'm really, really fascinated by, are claims that seem to have their origins in episodes of sleep paralysis. Okay. And sleep paralysis, we've done quite a lot of research on this particular topic, because it occurs not only in this kind of context, but more generally. In its most basic form, it's when you're between sleep and wakefulness, and you basically have a temporary period of paralysis. You realise you can't move. And it typically lasts a few seconds, and you kind of snap out of it, and you think that was a bit weird. But if that's all that happens, you probably don't worry too much about it. But it can be associated with other symptoms that can make it absolutely terrifying. And the most common ones are, even if you can't see or hear anything in the room with you, you've got a very strong sense of presence. You feel as if there's something or someone in the room with you. But you may actually also hallucinate. You may see weird stuff, like lights moving around the room, or dark shadows, or strange beings. You may hear noises like voices or mechanical sounds, footsteps, whatever. You may even have tactile hallucinations. Any type of hallucination you could experience during sleep paralysis. Yeah. You also, very often it's reported, you get a strong pressure on the chest, difficulty breathing. People often report they feel as if they're being strangled. There's something on top of them.
Have you spoken to people?
Oh, yeah. I get sent loads, because people know I've got an interest in it. I get sent lots of first-hand accounts. And there's a lot, I can present a lot of the first-hand accounts in my book.
There's lots of stuff in your book. Yeah, lots of stuff.
And it's, and these are from people who for themselves decided, it's this thing called sleep paralysis. Yeah. A lot of them wouldn't be going to the science for the answer. They'd be going to their local priest. Or their local shaman or whatever, But these are people who've decided, it's this thing called sleep paralysis. It wasn't real. It was a hallucination. Still terrifying because it feels real while it's happening. And reading the stories that people send in, the accounts I get can send a shiver down the spine. You think, oh my gosh, people think this was really happening to them.
So that's interesting. You touched on it briefly here, but about the priests and things like that. What do you think about these people who, and I don't know if they still do it, in these exorcisms where people feel they're possessed? Oh God, the exorcisms are still a big thing. I mean, the current Catholic Church is quite big on exorcisms. Still, yeah. And there's also a huge number of kind of unofficial exorcisms. Again, I've written some stuff on that. That's a topic I don't cover so much in the book, but I've written chapters about it for edited volumes elsewhere. Would that be different in different countries? Would some countries be more inclined on that than others?
There will be differences. Like, I'm in America, for example, where there's much higher level of fundamentalist Christians than there is in this country. Much higher level of belief in the literal reality of demons and Satan.
Yeah, I briefly read that in the book about Democrats and Republicans.
Exactly.
About how many. It was really interesting. Yeah.
Republicans are much more likely to kind of go for this kind of stuff because of the influence of the Christian right in America. But also in other countries, South America, there's a lot of belief in possession in lots of countries. I say not so much over here on some countries on the continent. I mean, Poland is quite strong in Poland, but in other countries,
is this more because of Catholicism?
I think it's like historical reasons. As I say, if Catholicism is strong in a country, they're likely to believe in this kind of stuff.
So, what do you think about life after death and the afterlife?
I'm an atheist, that I don't believe in life after death.
What about when these interesting people who they say they've died and they're having an operation and they see the room?
It's absolutely fascinating, near-death experiences. Yeah. I could be wrong. One thing to say, I could be wrong about all this stuff.
Of course, and you're very clear on that.
That is really an important part of skepticism for me. I'm just telling you what I think on the basis of the evidence as it currently stands,
and you've still got an open mind.
Yeah, well, we'll come back to the near-death experience in a second, but we quite often test psychic claimants. They're actually kind of around the world. There are various kind of cash offers for any psychics who could demonstrate their claimed abilities under properly controlled conditions. And we often end up doing those tests, and people never pass them, But every time we do one of those tests, I'm kind of, essentially putting my beliefs on the line and saying, well, okay, well, let's see, and if we got results back that suggested.
So there's all this unclaimed money out there.
Oh yeah. There's $500,000 on offer from an American group. And again, there used to be $1 million on offer, but now it's just a measly $500,000. So I can understand why people can't be bothered to go for it, But well, that money is there. But going back to the kind of near-death experiences, what I think is happening there, I say I could be wrong, but what I think it's a very rich and transformative but hallucinatory experience. I mean, there's essentially two kind of main positions on that topic. I mean, one is that near-death experiences are exactly what they feel like to the people who have them. That is, that they become convinced that, the mind, the soul, whatever you want to call it, consciousness, can become separated from the physical body, and that maybe it's a kind of glimpse of the afterlife. And then there's what's sometimes referred to as the kind of the visions of a dying brain approach, basically saying that there's weird stuff going on in the brain in these circumstances, and this is how it's experienced, but it's a hallucinatory experience. And I mean, one aspect of the latter is that at least it's potentially testable. I mean, there are lots of different components to a near-death experience, and some of them occur outside of the near-death experience. So, I mean, because it's actually really difficult to study near-death experiences under controlled conditions. You can't invite people into the lab and then bring them near to death. The ethics committees just won't allow it. We've tried. No, we haven't. But what you can do is, like, for example, out-of-body experience is a very common feature of near-death experiences. Now, out-of-body experiences also occur outside of that context.
Yeah, people often say that.
And there are some people who claim that they can induce an out-of-body experience more or less at will. They go through various mental exercises, and they can engage in. They might call it astral projection. They might have a whole host of terms for it, but it's essentially out-of-body experiences. Well, we only need one person who could sit in that chair that you're sitting in, have an out-of-body experience, and tell me what's in the next room. And that's
Has that never been tested?
Yeah, well, it'd be so easy to demonstrate it. And if even one person could do it, that's it, game over. The skeptics have lost. And yet that's not happened. Really? And that tells you something, doesn't it, I think?
Because I thought that some people had actually done that.
No, you might get various claims. You'll certainly get claims of people who say that while they were having their out-of-body experience, they witnessed this, they witnessed that, and then when they went back to check, it really was like that. You'll find that kind of claim. But under properly controlled conditions, it's such a simple test to do.
I was going to say, it's a simple test,
we take a pack of playing cards and just select one at random, put it on the table in the room next door.
And no one's done that.
And they come back and they say it was the three of clubs. But
I thought someone might have done that.
They've tried. There've been studies that have tried to do it, but
because there was times where they were saying the government were doing that. And they were going and seeing what's happening over in Russia or whatever.
There were remote viewing studies.
Yeah,
that's right. And the whole Star Wars program that was being funded by, the military intelligence and all that kind of thing in the States.
And you feel that wasn't.
Well, that was a really interesting episode because, it got lots of headlines. And I think it was something like $20 million had been invested. And for most people, you think, wow, that's a lot of money. Of course, in terms of a defence budget, it's a mere drop in the ocean. It's hardly anything. But what they did for the Stargate program, they decided that they needed to evaluate it, and they got two different experts to evaluate it. One was a statistician, a woman called Jessica Utz, and she was known to be very, very sympathetic towards parapsychology. And the other was a guy called Professor Ray Hyman, who's an American professor of psychology, who is a very well-informed skeptic. Wow. And guess what? They came to different conclusions. I mean, at the time, it was quite interesting because Hyman did get to the point of saying that he thought there was something going on. He kind of acknowledged that these seemed to be better controlled studies than he'd seen before, and he thought that there was something going on. There were certainly statistically significant findings there. He wasn't convinced that the best explanation was in terms of some kind of paranormal ability. And then subsequent kind of papers were published which cast further doubt on it. So it's one, like a lot of areas in parapsychology, it's one of those where opinion is still divided.
What about the people who would take part in it then, the people who partake in it, who are doing it? What sort of people would they be, do you think?
Well, often they would be professional psychics. I mean, often that they often are people who are kind of within the world of the paranormal, have high
'Cause
profiles.
they use it in like criminology and things like that.
I don't think they do.
They don't use
well,
it
no,
anymore.
no. You're talking about kind of the psychic detectives,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
And again, it's a very kind of murky area. Now you'll find that most police forces, the vast majority, will say we do not make use of psychics. And the psychics will say, oh, well, they have to say that because if they admitted it, you know, there'd be people up in arms and so on. And there might be a certain degree of truth. Now, at the level of individual coppers, there will be some who believe in this stuff. Even if the vast majority are skeptical, there'll be some who believe in it and might occasionally go and to their favourite psychic and ask for some kind of guidance. But when you, again, so you have to look at the kind of the overall picture. Now, in general, it doesn't come out looking good for the psychic detectives. They have a tendency to exaggerate their successes, shall we say. And you go back and you look in detail at, well, okay, so what have you said? Whenever there's a high-profile case, then they will come out and start saying, oh, you know, the body will be found by water, or the killer looks like this, or you know, I've even had kind of some personal experience with this. I'm trying to think what the woman's name was. I've got the name Nella Jones in my head, but I think that might be another one. I'm not sure. Anyway, there was quite a high-profile psychic who'd said various things about the Yorkshire Ripper killings. And I kind of did the Esther Ranson used to have a daytime TV program. I was on that with her, kind of up against her, if you like. And one of the things which I had found from kind of preparing for this was that she had said that when the Yorkshire Ripper was carrying out these murders, he was dressed as a woman. Now, in fact, Peter Sutcliffe, who it turned out to be, had a full beard and moustache throughout the entire period. No, he did not dress as a woman. And I kind of challenged her with that on the show, and she just kind of turned around and said, "No, that wasn't me. That was this other psychic." Said, and that kind of wrong-footed me a bit because obviously I didn't. Maybe she was telling the truth now. We did get to the point where where she admitted that in all the drawings that she'd done she'd done various drawings of the alleged. He always was clean shaven, which Peter Sutcliffe obviously was not. So it would have been very misleading if the police had listened to her. And subsequently, I was able to kind of go back and check my sources, and no, she had actually said that he dressed as a woman.
It's quite
She
damaging,
just lied,
isn't it? Because
you know?
it can put the police off a track
Well,
completely.
it could. I mean, and they're in a dilemma because if they don't follow something up, and then it turned out to be true, and there's you can imagine a situation where, let's say, the psychic gets wind of some information because they happen to know somebody who knows who did it, and they get the information that way, but they don't want to point the finger at somebody, because they don't want kind of recriminations against that person. They might just say, "Oh, it came to me in a dream." Now the police then, if they don't follow it up and it turns out that the information was correct, they'd be criticised for that. So the police are in a really difficult situation, a no-win situation. So
that's quite interesting that that area can be damaging as well as it can be. It can be helpful.
It's usually not very helpful. I mean, there are in most of these cases, when you dig deep beneath the headlines and the self-promotion, you find that they've not been quite, well, in fact, anywhere near as helpful as they claim they are. Now, again, there are one or two cases where I think, you might say, oh, well, maybe there was something going on there, but in the vast majority, no. You've got, They come out with a lot of stuff. It's a bit like similar to the cold reading we were talking about earlier. They come out with lots and lots and lots of information, including lots of names. Excuse me. And so some of them occasionally will be a hit. There'll be lucky guesses. There'll also be some of the stuff they'll be saying will be based upon speculation that's already taking place in the press and in other areas. Because again, when you've got a high-profile case, there is a lot of speculation about, maybe the person does this for a living, or maybe they've got that kind of background, etc., etc. There'll be embellishment after the facts. Once the facts are known, then the bits of what they'd said previously that can be made to look
in.
like a hit will be emphasised, and all the stuff that they said that was misleading, which will be a lot more, just shove that to one side, you know. And that is typically how it works.
Yeah. Have you had any experience on the, and I can't pronounce this, the Ouija board?
Oh yeah, I've had personal experience.
Have you?
When I was a student, we used to a typical Friday night after we'd all been to the pub, we'd get home and we didn't have a proper Ouija board. We just had to do the old-fashioned way with scraps of paper with A to Z written on them, and then digits from 0 to 9, and one for yes and one for no, and we'd lay them out in a circle. We'd get a wine glass. As I recall, I think we used to do the thing where everybody would breathe into it and pass it on, and then you put it down on a smooth table, and you start asking questions.
Yeah.
And sometimes some sessions were kind of better than others, insofar as sometimes the glass would kind of almost refuse to move. But so you all place your finger then on the bottom of the glass, the upturned glass, and it'll then slide quite easily with relatively little pressure.
Where did that come from? Where's the history of that?
Well, it started off as a board game. It started off without. Yeah, it was sold in shops as a board game. And well, this is the proper Ouija board I'm talking about now.
Yeah.
It only kind of took on the kind of spiritualist interpretation after a while.
Okay. So it's not based on anything really. Really, someone created it as a board game.
Well, essentially, yeah. I mean, it's based. The way it works is it works because of something called the ideomotor effect, and that refers to the fact that what's actually happening is that people are pushing the glass around without being consciously aware of the fact. So I can vouch for the fact that it is a very powerful illusion. You don't. I mean, when I'd say I used to do this with my mates. So we go back from the pub. We'd often.
And would you be taking it seriously?
Well, it was interesting. No, not really. There was only one guy in the house. There were 6 of us students living in the same house. One guy took it very seriously and wouldn't have anything to do with it. He would scuttle off to his bedroom and refuse to have anything to do with it. Yeah. The rest of us definitely did it for entertainment only. So I don't think we took it seriously. But we still found that it worked, whether you take it seriously or not. It works in the sense of you ask it questions and you get semi-sensible answers, or sometimes quite sensible answers. Now, what's going to happen? One of the very first things you're likely to say is, so what's your name? And if it then goes to the letter B, and we all have a friend called Bernie. We're all thinking, maybe it's Bernie. And then we'll all go to the A. And then it goes to R, and it spells out that. So that's kind of part of what's happening there. If it was really some kind of outside force, then you ought to be able to blindfold people, turn the board round, and still get sensible answers. But you can't. It doesn't work that way.
Well, in the Victorian times, like. I've read some bits in your book as well, like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He genuinely believed in that there was fairies.
Total believer. So it's amazing that because clearly he was an extremely intelligent man. Yeah. But he was also one of the most credulous people you could imagine. He believed in all sorts of stuff, including fairies. He wrote whole books about. Yeah.
He went on tours.
Fairies. Yeah. He was a huge supporter of spiritualism as well, possibly because he lost his son. In the First World War, and ironically, he was for a period of time he was a great friend of Houdini, and Houdini was like the arch debunker of psychics and mediums. He was a total skeptic because he could recreate all of their effects just as well, if not better, than they could. And so he would go around and kind of expose fake mediums.
Is that when it sort of exploded in the Victorian times?
That's when seances really took off. It all can be traced back quite precisely to a little house in Hydesville in New York State in 1848, where the Foxes lived. The Fox sisters, a couple of young sisters, reported that they could hear these strange rapping sounds, and they couldn't figure out what they were. And then they realised that it was a kind of code they could use to talk to the spirit of a peddler, allegedly, who'd been murdered. And that's where it all started.
Right.
And so initially it just kind of caused local interest, and then it spread. And it turns out, I mean, it was not until 40 years later that they admitted it was all a hoax. They were producing these noises in various different ways. One of the ways they could do it is they could crack their joints very loudly.
Wow.
And that's one of the ways, techniques that they'd use. And this was kind of demonstrated in public. It was then claimed by this time the spiritualist movement had spread all around the world. You know, including obviously Europe is still going strong, and a lot of the supporters of spiritualism said, "Oh, they've been got at." You know, they've been. Because by this time they were both penniless alcoholics.
Oh, were they?
They were.
Okay.
Their sister their elder sister Leah had who's a business. Had a head for business. Yeah. She'd done very well out of taking them on tour and so on, but they themselves didn't lead very happy lives.
Because the girls who'd done the fairies that was believed, they did actually in the end, didn't they? Admit they didn't.
Yeah, that's another. There's two of the famous cases where a schoolgirl prank got out of hand.
Yeah.
You know, once people like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle were taking an interest, and it became a national phenomenon. But it wasn't again until they were very old that they admitted.
And it's funny because even when they admit it, there's still people who want to believe it.
Oh yeah. I mean, as a story, it's got a certain kind of magic. It's got quite. I mean, I can see the appeal, but you can also see that it was. Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that one of the nails in the coffin of the Cottingley fairies was that a children's book was found that had illustrations in it that were identical to the fairies that had been photographed.
Oh, okay.
And they'd been copied and they'd been just kind of pinned up or hung up.
So basic, really, at the
Absolutely,
time.
Yeah.
And like you say, a schoolgirl prank just literally went.
Yeah. I mean, and again, it's kind of quite interesting. I mean, because back in that era, belief in fairies amongst educated people,
that's what fascinates me.
On any kind of magic mushrooms or anything, you know, they were. And Conan Doyle, as I say, being the most kind of notable proponent, but his views were taken very seriously by a lot of people, and they would have used exactly the same arguments as people might use for UFOs. Yeah, they would basically say that. I mean, there were photographic experts who declared that the photographs were not hoaxed; they were genuine photographs. People. There were other sightings from people on the continent and elsewhere by very respectable people, and there've always been stories told about fairies. I mean, and again, the parallels with aliens are quite interesting. These other beings that would come and maybe take a baby away and return it, or there's so many themes in common. Yeah. So
that's interesting. How do you? So you still got students, obviously. They're still.
Oh no, I've retired.
Have you retired now? Are young people still going into this and doing courses? And
well, I don't think.
Is it still available in universities and colleges?
It is in. Well, when I say it, I mean you need to make a distinction between eventually ended up calling my module because it was an optional module. It was part of our BSc, but you could choose to do it or not. I ended up calling it anomalistic psychology, and that was more or less a way of flagging up that this is going to be a fairly skeptical approach to the topic. There are other places that maybe don't take such a skeptical approach. They might cover some of the skeptical stuff, but they'll also kind of, if you like, be kind of more sympathetic towards the pro-paranormal stuff. So Northampton, for example, Northampton University, there's probably more parapsychologists at Northampton University than any other place in the world, really? Surprisingly, and they're doing all kinds of research. They're almost all the people I've interacted with from Northampton are very much on the believers' side of the debate. Right, and, you could interview one of them, and they'd give you a completely different account
which would be interesting to do.
Exactly. And we I quite often end up kind of doing kind of friendly debates with them. We get on okay personally, but we disagree about the evidence.
Tell us about your new book then. What's
the new one? Or this one here, The Science of Weird Sht. That title started off as just a joke. I mean, I was originally going to call it Why Weird Stuff Matters, which I still think is not a bad title, because it tells us a lot about human psychology. But I was just kind of joking with a few friends and kind of said, "Oh, I might just call it the Science of Weird Sht." And almost without exception, they said, "Oh, I'd buy that."
Yeah, yeah.
So,
yeah.
oh, all right then. So I kind of put it to the publishers, who, you know, very respectable publishers, you know, MIT Press, and I wasn't sure that they'd buy it. Oh, they liked it. So
That's good.
So that's the. And what I was somewhat worried about is I didn't want to give the impression that I was kind of being dismissive and just kind of laughing at all this stuff.
Well, people know from the podcast you're not laughing.
Yeah, if they read it. But I mean, the title might put people off, which kind of was a bit of a worry. But, you know, on the other hand, it's probably more than made up for by the fact that it's an eye-catching title.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Kind of,
so if you wanted to get your book now, you would just go on Amazon? Is it sold?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon. The paperback came out earlier this year. It's also available on Audible. So we can buy it in lots of different formats.
So I'll leave it there because obviously you're very busy. But
okay.
We are going to, if you'd like, I'd love you to come back and do some on more specific.
Yeah, no,
because you've got so much stuff in this book, we could never get through it in a small podcast. But, you know, I really appreciate you coming in. Thank you for all that information. And I'm really hoping that you'll come back and we'll do more specific because everyone would love to see this.
Sounds good to me, Bern.
Thanks very much, Chris.
Okay,
Thanks very much for coming in. Thank you. That was great. I love that.